Code 551, and specifically to receive an update and to secure legal advice and counsel from the attorney related to a pending legal matter, Christine Reyes versus City of Alice, Texas. Counsel?
John, could you advise us on how we should state this motion, please?
Yes, Councilman, that you move to authorize the interim city manager to negotiate the settlement as approved and discussed in executive session.
Motion as stated.
No, it actually stated. What, Mayor, I move to authorize interim city manager to enter and formalize a settlement agreement as discussed in executive session. Christina Reyes v. City of Alice, Texas.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Oh.
Okay. Got a second? All in favor?
Aye.
And no opposed? Motion stands as stated. Thank you. 11B, Government Code 551.074, Personnel-Related Matters and Consultation with Attorney 551.071, Attorney Consultation to engage in a private consultation with its attorney on a matter in which the attorney has a duty to provide confidential and privileged legal advice relating to the following matters. B1, legal advice and counsel relating to the city's rights, duties, privileges, and obligations in connection with the adoption of and/or modifications to policies relating to pay, reductions in personnel, retirement criteria, and leave accrual for City of Alice personnel. Council, I'll entertain a motion on 11B. Okay, there's no action.
No action.
No action
There was
taken?
no action taken on this item.
Okay, no action taken on 11B. Thank you, council. Okay, now we revert back to agenda item number,
Mayor, if we could, on agenda item 9, I'd like to request at this time that this agenda item be tabled, and we will bring it back next week after we complete the final review of the bids that have come in.
very good. Council, if there's no objections, we'll table agenda item number 9. Okay. And then now we'll proceed to agenda item number 7.
Very good.
Review and discussion of 2016-2017 fiscal year revised city budget and 2017 and 2018 fiscal year proposed City of Alice budget.
All right.
Right. Drum roll.
I saw the change in numbers were so high, I didn't even bring my book. Because this is so
That was
different.
completely different.
Yeah, it's so different. Thank you.
Good job. Roll in. You're gonna break it.
What is he doing with it?
Trying to pull it out.
Jim,
Jim.
needs help.
Rolling.
I don't think my voice is loud enough to carry and pick up on the mic, I'm sorry. Okay. You ready, Mr. Ramos? All right, here we go. right, guys, y'all ready? Okay, so I know, and first I thank you all for all the time that you all have put into sitting with staff and taking as much time as we need to continue to work through this budget. The packet that has just been handed out to you, on the very first page, it is a table that reads Consolidated Fund Summary for Proposed 2018. I'm going to capture a snapshot to begin with of, in totality, what we have worked and accomplished, and then we will go into detail into each fund and what is still pending in order to achieve the goal of balancing our budget and also achieve the council's goal of balancing the general fund while maintaining the current tax rate. The handout that was handed to you, you're going to see a column that reads Original Proposed, and you're going to see all your funds: general fund, solid waste, utility, airport, golf course, and multi-use complex. These are the numbers that were in the budget handed to you on August the 2nd, and you're going to notice that the general fund had a deficit of $762,377. Your solid waste fund had excess of revenues over expenditures of $350,809, and your utility fund excess of revenues over expenditures of $411,568. The budget that was presented to you on that night was a zero balanced budget. As we moved through the workshops, you're going to notice the next column where it says increases or reductions. Through the process of the budget workshops in the general fund, we have been able to find revenues and expenditures that are in the amount of $535,386, bringing the deficit in the general fund down to $226,991. In the solid waste fund, additional cuts were made totaling $118,356, bringing the amount to $232,453, and $147,258 in cuts to the utility fund, bringing that amount now to $264,309. The red amount on the general fund, the $226,991 right now, does not take into account any decisions that need to be made left for retirement criteria, nor does it take into account any of the proposed fees. Okay? If you'll turn to the next page, and it is going to be, so everyone is on the same page, a handout that looks like this: general fund in the top left-hand corner. And it reads very similar to what you all were seeing in your budget books. You're going to see the first column, Original Proposed, and you'll notice as you go down, you're going to see that bottom row, excess of revenues over expenditures in the negative, $762,377. The next column, increases or reductions, are going through each fund and are attributing to either reductions to expenses, increases to revenues, or a combination of the both. The far right-hand column is going to show new proposed numbers. Revenue, we were able to find an additional $266,842, and we'll go in through the detail of where that came about in just a moment. And then the expenditures, thank you, Pat. We were able to reduce by $268,544. When you combine those, you're looking at an additional $535,386 added to the deficit of $762,377, bringing the deficit in the general fund at this point to $226,991. Again, remember, this does not account for any of the final decisions that need to be made. So a lot of progress has been done on this fund. This does include, like I mentioned, the current tax rate. And it does not include the final icing on the cake, which will be the proposed fees. Okay? When you turn to the next page, you're going to see the actual page from the budget book. And this is still for the general fund. And I know a lot of you all are interested in seeing where are we, because one of the goals that some of council had stated in prior meetings is that they wanted to zero the general fund, balance your general fund. but also try and achieve the goal of 3 months of reserves in the general fund. We are working very hard at being able to balance the general fund, and I think we may be able to get very close to having 3 months of reserves, but I don't think we're going to be quite there. This essentially captures what is on the page before you, and as you move down to the far right-hand column, 2018 proposed, you're going to see that deficit of $226,991. Underneath that, you are going to see the months of fund balance. So these are the reserves in your general fund. And right now, with that deficit of $226,991, you have approximately 2.57 months of reserves. This will compare back to page 4 of your budget book, which was the original snapshot of these exact same numbers. With the budget that was presented at that point, like we talked about, the deficit of $762,376, and at that point you had 1.91 months of reserves. I'll go through this because I know that we can go into more detail later, but if y'all will allow me to move to the next fund. Are y'all following okay? Are there any questions? Okay. Same process as before. We are going to look at the solid waste fund. This was one of the funds that is doing very, very well. We found reductions in expenses totaling $118,356. And you will notice under 45,990, there is an increase to the general fund transfer. And when I mentioned how we would go into detail of how we were able to close that gap in the general fund, we'll refer back to this number in just a moment. So right now, your solid waste fund is still doing very well. And as you turn your page, you're going to find that the months of fund balance in there are currently 9.53. The utility fund, again, an enterprise fund that has been doing very well over the years. And you will see the same process as you move through each department. You will notice reduction to expenses. Again, under 5990, that interfund transfer, you will see an increase, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But we did find combined a reduction of 147,258. And once plugging that into your utility fund, you have an ending fund balance of about 6.89 months. The airport fund is one of the funds that the general fund usually transfers to. It did have a transfer this year as well. There were some small adjustments that could be made for the airport fund, but essentially you've tried to keep your revenues and expenses equal. There's not very much of a change. The fund did operate at a deficit in 17. And we're hoping that as we move through the process of continuing to look at our processes and our procedures, the airport is one of the big ones on our list. It is, I believe Mr. Brazel calls it a gem, the city's gem. And I plan to visit out there with Mr. Foley here as soon as this process is done and start looking at what we can be doing out there to generate more revenue. Golf course is next. Again, a quality of life service that we offer to our public. We did lower the operations expense by $2,109. This fund has been operating in the deficit and has taken transfers from the general fund over the years. But we continue to look there and have been focusing on fees, specifically the leases there. The last is going to be your multi-use complex fund. We talked about how this fund is currently in its infancy. With the full months of July and August that were open and us to be able to see some true data, Finance did work through some of the projections for revenue and for services, and we've made some adjustments there, but essentially your fund has no change at this point. The last sheet is your consolidated fund summary. And this is an update to the consolidated fund summary that was given to you all in your budget books originally, and that's going to be Roman numeral number 19 in your budget book. And what this encompasses is taking all the information that we talked about on these sheets, bringing them into your consolidated funds, which are your general fund, solid waste, utility, airport, golf, and multi-use complex fund. And to the far right on the bottom, before any more discussions or decisions are made regarding the general fund, which we need to focus, you do have an excess of revenues over expenditures of $269,771. And right now you are looking at combined months of expenses in your fund balance for general fund, solid waste, operating, and utility fund at 4.95. Again, this is before we go back and focus on the last goals to achieve in the general fund. And for that, we're gonna kind of walk through a couple of things. And Vanessa, do you have give me a moment. The breakdown specifically of how we got to the, and as I talk, just make sure I'm giving the right numbers. Okay. So, when looking at the general fund, of course, we went and looked at several things, but with each passing month as sales tax data comes in, we're constantly looking and focusing, and we had told you prior that it has stabilized. The Comptroller's Office is expecting for this year about a 3% increase to our sales tax. When we presented the proposed budget to you all, we explained that we were very, very conservative with the budget numbers that went into the sales tax as part of our revenue. Mr. Ramos and Vanessa and the team went back and they studied our sales tax a little more carefully, and they would feel comfortable in raising the monthly amount, or the monthly amount that we are setting aside as revenue in the budget by about $10,000, an increase of about $10,000 a month, which is going to give you an additional $120,000 in your budget. And that is equating to about a 2.5% increase, which is lower than what the comptroller is predicting of 3%. I agree with that assessment. It is always something that we can adjust, but the last few months have been coming in above budget, and we do see that stabilization trend coming into play. So that $120,000 is part of the reason we're starting to close that gap in the general fund. The next thing that we did is we looked very carefully at our interfund transfers. Interfund transfers are meant to cover overhead allocation, and we kind of touched about this a little bit in the transmittal letter. Vanessa, if need be, can give you a very detailed explanation of how this calculation comes about. But essentially what we're doing is we're determining, for example, your utility fund. We do take a transfer from the utility fund to the general fund to cover overhead allocations. What does the general fund do for the utility fund to get this money back? Well, there are several things. We use our personnel. For example, your city manager, your city clerk, your finance department specifically are taking care of a lot of the day-to-day paperwork and things that happen in the utility fund. Your streets department will take care of, for example, when they need to break a street to fix a water line break, they will take care of the repair to that project. They also haul sludge away from the wastewater plant. Those are some of the services that we do. Essentially what that interfund transfer is doing is allocating the appropriate amounts of these personnel costs, these overhead allocations, from one fund and transferring them to the other. We looked very carefully at the initial, and again, we were always very conservative with the starting budget. We looked very carefully at those overhead allocations, and we increased the transfer from the utility fund to the general fund by $185,000. So you have your 120, your 185. We did the same thing with the solid waste fund. We increased that transfer by $125,000 to the general fund. There was also some items that had not been attributed or accounted for in the budget. The savings from the ambulance contract was taken into account as well. And then there was some positions that by attrition or by transferring of personnel, we will be able to remove those personnel expenses from the general fund. And if my math is correct, if you give me a moment, we should be a little away from, do I have this right, Mr. Ramos? I don't have a calculator, I'm sorry.
There's one right there. Thank you.
Is this the right number? 751, 914. I was trying to calculate where the rest of that difference was, but the remaining 105,386 is actually coming from additional cuts that were made to expenditures in the budget. So right now, your general fund, taking into account these changes to your revenues and taking into account the additional cuts that we found in expenditures, your general fund does have a deficit at this point of 226,991. Earlier, we had the gentleman, and he actually, Mr. Mills is still with us. He gave to you all the presentation on TMRS. And from the beginning, from the workshop on the 11th, it was something that we were looking at. And of course, the goal was to try and find savings without keeping our number 2 goal in mind, which was to continue to provide services but not touch our personnel as much as we could. We worked very closely with TMRS, and we've been able to find some solutions where you wouldn't be impacting your employees too heavily, still provide to them a benefit, but get you some significant savings and budgetary impact to your budget. If you want to look at the scenarios that were presented to you, I had handed out the same information that Mr. Mills had gone over, but essentially it has the calculations for personnel. Yes, it looks like this in your budget. As you move through each option, and there's going to have to be some discussion from council and staff to determine what is the best option that they feel. For staff, option 4 is one that we were considering, and we'd like to discuss with the council. That would be leaving your matching ratio at 2-to-1. Using the tools that we have at our disposal in our TMRS plan provisions and reducing the updated service credit from 100% to 50%. Reducing the annuity increase from 70 to 30, which would bring the retirement rate from 9.34 to 4.73, and would bring your current funded ratio from 89.2 to a little over 100% at 101%. This, through the funds collectively, would have a reduction of $302,601. The impact by fund, as we break it out with the personnel, is underneath that. Of the 226,991 deficit that you have in your general fund right now, the budgetary savings would be 226,992, and you would have an excess dollar in your general fund. The reduction to the solid waste, 29,161, bringing that balance to 261,614. The utility fund at 39,842 in reduction, bringing that balance to 304,151. The golf course a reduction of 5,358, and the natatorium a reduction of 1,248, totaling a total reduction of 302,601. Taking that scenario into account and plugging it into the information that we talked about earlier would bring your, and Mr. Ramos, you're going to have to help me here.
Yes. That one plus the 269.
Yeah. It would raise the budgetary impact by an additional 572,372, which would mean that combined with your funds, zeroing out your general fund and taking the scenario into account, you would have an excess of revenues over expenditures consolidated in all your funds of and I apologize for not having this prepared ahead of time, but we've been working very, very hard on which scenario would be best. 842,143. No?
No, it should be,
No, it would be the 572,372 would be,
The total?
yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. 572,372. Did I say that right? 572,372. Another option for council to consider that would bring us very, very close, it would still leave a little bit of a deficit in your general fund, and we could think about and perhaps find additional cuts, is option 5. Keeping your match at the same, reducing the service credit to 75, keeping your, reducing your annuity to 30. It would bring you 100% funded, reduce your rate to 5.31, and in totality, you would have a reduction to your budget consolidated of 264,529. Option 2 would touch your match. It would give you a greater impact to your budget. It would lower your funding, your matching ratio from 2-to-1 to 1.5-to-1. Updated service credit of 50, annuity increase of 50, lowering your total rate to 4.17, and funding ratio of 98.2%. And the budgetary impact would be 339,358. And the last option is option 3, which is taking your current matching ratio from 2-to-1 to 1-to-1, updated service credit to 50, annuity increase to 30, lowering your total rate to 1.04. You would be 104.70% funded with the biggest impact to your budget of 544,811.
I have a question.
Okay, just a question to clarify. The reason for splitting the excess to the different funds and not just the general fund, if you can just clarify?
You're referring to the interfund transfers?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So your Mr. Ramos, do you want to?
No.
Well, no,
Talking
right,
here.
right here.
Oh,
So-
I'm sorry.
On the
Well,
4.
Because each one
Just
has its own
curious.
payroll.
Because each one has its own personnel and payroll, so you have people that are general fund only.
Mm-hmm.
What we're doing is showing the reductions per fund and then in totality.
Gotcha.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, perfect.
I'm sorry, I thought I was reverting back to
No,
interfund
no, that's
transfers.
Because I'm just seeing that excess as a big number
Yes,
we would be saving and, okay.
yes.
Thank you. Mr. Crisp, question?
Can I shoot back away from payroll because I have another
Absolutely.
question in regards to the general fund as a whole?
Sure.
Under taxes this is on the general fund sheet right here. Under taxes, it's the second page in the handouts that she gave us. You stated that we increased the sales tax by about 10,000 a month, which would equal to 120,000, but under taxes, it has 274,492. Where does that extra 154,492 come from?
Here.
It's the tax rate.
Do you want to?
Do you want me to explain?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
See what she's saying.
That's where we're simply recalculated.
Oh, the recalculation.
Oh, at the
Was
percentage?
Yes, your M and O
The
and your
95%
INS,
versus the
yes.
92%?
Yes.
No, Sydney increased the M and O,
M and O and.
kind of like the same scenario as that the school was
school,
talking about.
mhm.
Okay.
They increased the M and O,
Our
I mean M and O.
M&O,
and
instead of the sinking fund
Able to get a little bit more. That's
Yep.
that handout.
to operating.
Instead of having the property taxes use up, or using up more property taxes for that, we're doing direct transfers from the funds to the debt service. That way your debt service is less and you can have more coming in
Right.
towards
To your
your
M&O.
This-
M&O.
okay,
Kind of
gotcha.
like a-
What the school did.
Right, and on the handout that was just handed to you, to the far right-hand side is the rates that we would be looking at.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Crisp?
No, that's it for now.
Ms. Carrasco, you had a question?
Yes, I have a few questions, and if y'all will bear with me.
No, you take your time.
Going back to a presentation on post-tax rates, for the handout that we received back in August 9th,
Okay.
okay, which is this one, the presentation you did, okay. On there, we had different scenarios with the .53, .577, and then the rollback tax. On the rate used, it says .53, effect on general fund balance is 1 million, or what is it, whatever, 1.140.
Will you, do you mind holding it up again so I know which one you're referring to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I can hear you better.
You
Yeah.
can't hear me? Okay. So I was just, my question is, from when this was presented to what is being presented today, where it changed to 762, 377, where did we find, or, since it's based on .53 still, right, in revenues? Is it because of the, how did we find that and bring it down to the 762?
Part of that was what Mr. Crispin mentioned, where we had.
Where you moved?
We had calculated 92%. We were real conservative on that portion of it.
You moved it to 95?
Moved up to 95.
So moving it to 95, getting more sales tax, and then the moving more into the M and O that's what made it come to the, okay. Okay. I had a question, but I wasn't sure how. Okay, and so we moved our taxes based on a 95%.
Yes, ma'am. One of the things
Collection.
that we looked
Okay.
at was the collection rate.
Right.
And again, going back to when this was delivered to you all, we were very, very conservative, and we had estimated 92. Just like with any budget, and this is my first budget, so I'm a little different with the approach, and staff has been wonderful at really digging down through the data and giving as close to true projections as we feel are there. We feel comfortable with a 95% collection rate. Prior budgets, and correct me if I'm wrong, have always had that at 100%. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
I would adjust it every
And they would adjust it, revised, and we're taking a different approach.
Okay. Ms. Carrasco, any other questions?
I think that answered what I had.
Yes. Ms. Garza, any questions?
I have
Mr.
another one,
Crisp?
sorry.
Mhm.
As far as the interfund transfer rates, I'm sorry, I have another one that just
That's
came back
okay.
to me. As far as interfund transfer rates of our two, the utility fund and the solid waste fund, transferring in, As far as percentages are concerned, and I'm sure this has been talked about because we're increasing the amount of revenue that the city is making from the city, right? I mean, and it's not an uncommon practice. It's very common. I've been to 3 TML trainings already, and anytime you sit in revenues, that is talked about. That your utility funds help fund the city. But
Help fund your general fund.
yeah, help fund the general
The-
fund,
the
sorry, yeah.
operations, yes, sir.
That's, so sorry, yes. So are we, I mean, is there anything that y'all can do maybe to give us an idea if that
Sure.
is a comparable percentage? We're looking at almost $2 million, actually a little over $2 million in that
So,
transfer, so,
These are not new transfers. These are transfers that have been done every year.
right.
Even when the general fund was very healthy, there were these types of overhead allocations taken into account. There is a simple but complicated process to it, and if you will allow me, Vanessa and Melissa might be better able to explain to you all exactly how those percentages come into play.
And I appreciate this. I know we've
No,
gone
no,
through
no,
this
it's
before, but I
okay.
think it's a
But
good thing to get out to the general public.
It's actually very good for them to understand, and more importantly, for you all to understand that, again, with this approach, we're being very conservative.
The way, we have a spreadsheet, and basically, we have certain departments that we considered shared costs that will provide a service to all of the departments. And some of them are like the city clerk, administration, finance, IT, HR, garage that, works on all the units, engineering, streets and playgrounds, that go and mow for all of the facilities. And what we do is we figure out what their total expenses are. And then all the other all the other departments, we break it up between general fund, utility fund, solid waste fund, and things like that. And we take those and we figure out their total, and then we kind of get a percentage, based on that total. And then the ones I'm looking at here, that's why I'm saying down here, the shared costs, it figures out, okay, based on that, and based on the percentage for that fund, this is basically what you could transfer and be in, in line, if that makes any sense.
And
Yeah, it does.
the actual total that we were looking at is it's a little less than what we're actually proposing
Yes.
in the budget, correct? These are also run by, we worked very closely as we worked through this and touched on revenues on other things with the extension of our team, our financial advisor, Ann. She has been a tremendous source of assurance that the approach that we're taking is appropriate, appropriate for the situation that we are in, and more importantly, focusing on moving this city forward financially. The interfund transfers were discussed with her, and she feels comfortable with those slight increases.
Any other
That was it.
Ms. Moran, any questions?
I kind of want to get all of this simplified for not only my purposes, but for the general public as well, because we're shooting numbers out here, and people are hearing some numbers and may not. And again, just to be clear, can you just, in a nutshell, just kind of all bring it together, what we did? And I see that, but just so that I understand, we looked at the property taxes, and we went with the current tax rate rather than the effective tax rate, correct? So with that, we had a certain number that we needed to come up with, and which was our deficiency, right? Okay. And the way we addressed that was, in a nutshell, walk me through those steps.
So there are three basic things that you look at any budget: your revenues, your expenditures, and the impact it's going to have to your fund balance.
Can you speak?
Oh, I'm sorry.
You have a very soft voice.
I apologize.
Yep.
And to me, I feel like I'm speaking so loud because I can hear the echo.
I think, can you all hear now? Is that better? All right.
Okay. And you are correct. When we started this process, and the numbers are constantly going to be changing, like I've mentioned several times, your budget is a living, breathing document. We did start with, and the reason that we don't print these out over and over and over again is because you would have to have a line item for just paper in the budget. But going back to what you were trying to have me simplify, and sometimes this is a challenge for me because I am very analytical by nature. But to simplify, yes, and if you want me just to focus on general fund, will that help?
Yes,
Okay,
please.
that helps me as well.
Yes, the general fund. Because
So-
that's where we have the deficiency.
General fund, as presented to you August 2nd, had a deficit of $762,376. Okay? When we met the first time on that Saturday workshop, we had already put a lot of work into trying to close that. What was presented to you threefold is very simple: revenues, which are property taxes, sales tax, miscellaneous, franchise fees, and your expenditures for every department that is part of your general fund. And that is the majority of your departments: police, fire, administration, public works, operations, parks, library. Okay, so essentially you had more going out than you had coming in. Am I doing okay with the explanation so far?
Yes, you're doing great.
When this was given to you, we were very conservative. So we didn't know, and we were very conservative with numbers. The approach was different for us. So the revenues that were given to you, specifically starting with the property tax, had been budgeted at a collection rate of 92%. Going back and looking at it, prior councils and administrators had been budgeting at 100%. So we have raised that now to 95%. Okay. The second part of that equation is the sales tax. The sales tax we were very conservative with, again, and probably a little too conservative in trying to, and this is all part of your budget process. You want to
To whittle away at that
Yes, ma'am.
762,377.
Yes.
You were walking me through what we did to whittle away at that deficit.
So we're on revenue still, okay? So we did
We-
property tax.
We
We
our
raised the
property
collection
tax
rate.
collection and sales tax.
We looked at sales tax, and we raised that. We just talked about the interfund transfers, and we adjusted those as well. In addition, the last part of that revenue equation is what Mr. Chris referred to about the M&O and the INS.
Can you explain
Yes,
that a
ma'am.
little bit?
M&O is maintenance and operations. Maintenance, there's two portions of your tax rate, your M&O and your INS. Your INS is your interest and sinking, and it's no different than what the school district explained to you all earlier. That is money that is set aside to pay your debt. One of the first goals that was outlined in the transmittal letter and further reiterated to this council is that should be any council's primary goal, is make sure you have enough money to pay your debt. The second part of that equation is your M&O, your maintenance and operations, and that's money that's used to operate. The majority of it going to your general fund. We have a healthy fund balance in our interest and sinking, in our debt service fund. And working with the financial advisor, we did several things to make sure that we continue to have some surplus there, but lowering that rate a little bit to give us more to maintenance and operations, very similar to what the school district was doing. You're not changing your total rate. All you're doing is moving, and not everybody can do this. We're lucky in the sense of the school district as well, is that we have a healthy fund balance in our debt service. Okay, those and they seem like simple things, and people are probably saying, "Well, geez, people, you all sat here for hours and hours and hours, and really, this is all it's taking is you to sit here and explain it." It sounds simple, but it's not. There's a lot of math that is involved. There's a lot of calculations. There's a lot of studies. There's a lot of reassuring yourself that the projections that you're trying to give your council are appropriate, that they're not overstated. At least that's our approach with this budget. The last part of that equation is the expenditures. The proposed budget that was given to you had been whittled down, and there was still some whittling to do, and we talked about that. Through the workshops that you all sat in, that's where that last piece of that equation came into play. And like we talked about right now, the deficit that is in there in the general fund is $226,991, and there's still some decisions to be made in order to try and reach the goal of balancing that general fund.
So, going back to the INS, I'm going to pick at that just a little bit more.
Okay.
To ask, I understand we have a healthy fund balance there, what, to the tune of about 1.4? Is that correct, Mr. Ramos, more or less?
I think
Which
at
is
the
what
end
we-
it
we-
was like 1.2.
That's about
1.2 in
1.2.
reserves.
Mhm.
We took some of that money and we applied it to our INS, which was how much did we use there? About 250? 230?
230,000.
Which is what we had discussed when we met with Ann, okay.
And that was even the first time we brought that to you. That was
Right,
always
that was
in
already
the-
in the equation.
That was always going to be there.
Okay, that was always going to be, okay, so we used some of that helped us offset this deficit.
And one of the changes was is that she had, or Ann advised us to send to Sydney, is that you're making those bonds, like like the utility fund is paying for its bond.
Right.
And the solid waste is paying for its bond. So you're sending that money to debt service to help, not pay for the whole thing, but to pay a good portion. And that way, you don't need, on your property taxes, you can lower your INS because those funds are helping you to
Yes.
pay that already.
That's
and
where
you
I'm
free up
going.
more
More
money
to maintenance and
go towards
operation.
your
That's
general fund.
exactly where I was going with this line of
Furthermore,
questioning. I want it to be explained to the
furthermore, it,
public how that works.
It also.
How we were able to do this, which amazes me that we haven't done it before.
It's also important to note that one of the reasons for that suggestion is your bondholders are going to look very favorably upon that.
Exactly. So, one other thing about that, and Mr. Ramos, you may need to help me out on this because I'm not sure I quite understand. So I understand how we use the INS, the reserves that were in there to help offset some of this deficit. And I remember Ann coming up here and making a presentation about how our property taxes are used to pay down on our debt obligation. By the way, do we know how much debt we have in COs and bonds and things, more or less?
That's in your budget book.
It's in our budget book, so which
And
is,
there's actually a schedule for all the bonds and it's
but the
going
total,
by year.
total
Yes.
is about, what,
Um,
30 mil or something that we have in debt throughout the years, starting in, what, 1990? I know we had a 2009, 2010 CO that I think our utility,
Your total debt with principal and interest is 35 million.
30 plus, okay. So, and I'm asking these questions because what I want to get at is, have we considered using our utility billing system to offset or pay a portion of that debt? Do you know where I'm asking? I think you have
Yeah,
that
well-
experience of the question I'm asking.
Well,
Where we use some of the property tax monies and some of the utility, because as we've shown, the utility system always, it seems like it has a healthy fund, it always has,
I think
have we ever
when
considered
these-
doing that, or
when
are we
these were in-
doing it? or-
Yeah, when these were initially done, they I hope this clarifies some of it. They pledged ad valorem tax revenues. That's what they did, not the utility fund. Even though some of the improvements were for utilities
Right.
and the sanitation department, they didn't pledge
Because
those
when we
revenues.
fix our streets, for example, the general obligation COs that were issued for 2009, 2010 were to improve the streets, correct?
Right.
So in improving the streets, we were having to put in water and sewer lines.
Yes.
Are we
Some
using the
were-
utility, we did not upgrade our water and sewer when we improved the streets?
Some were sanitation,
I
some
would
were
think so,
sanitation,
yeah.
and some were utility improvements.
And I think.
So what the theory is now is have them to be more self-supporting. In other words, have the utilities contribute because the projects were for them
Exactly,
instead of taking all of it from the ad valorem taxes.
right.
And that's what you're doing now.
And that's what we're doing now,
Okay.
having them be more self-supporting.
Okay,
So I
that's,
hope that helps, I don't know.
yes, so we're going to be focusing
That
on
was the
doing
reason
that
for the
more
yes,
to
ma'am.
reduce some of that
Right.
ad valorem in the INS.
Right.
And that's how we were able to, that's how we were
And
able to
that's
get
how we
Sydney,
arrived at this.
Sydney to do it.
Yes, that's how we're able to justify that.
Okay. And I ask all these questions so that our audience and our citizens understand how we arrived at, how we whittled away down to, so what, we need 226,991?
Yes, ma'am, that is the,
Okay,
as
that's
it stands
where
at
we're
this
at now.
moment.
Okay.
And like I mentioned, that does not include fees, which should be the icing on your cake.
Good.
Going back to what you were speaking about, like we talked about, after we finish this process and we have an adopted budget, that information will be transmitted over to our financial advisor, and she will be back to update the presentation that she gave to you all a few months ago. And she will be back periodically because she is a huge asset to us in that we need to constantly be on top of our finances. Adopting this budget does not close this process.
Never does.
It is changing every day, every quarter, every month. Every night I go home and I have running numbers through my head.
And I really, Miss Diane, I really want to take this time to commend you, finance,
To commend them
staff,
back there.
this staff over here. You guys have done an outstanding job. I mean, we can see it in how we've whittled away at that deficit. Employees have an understanding of the responsibility that they have in going into the future when we adopt this budget, of how we're going to be watching that we stay within our budgets. You're given a budget, we stay within those line items. When council met here for the first time to discuss budget, our goal was we're not going to increase the tax rate, but we were going to hold all of us responsible. And I think we've done a good job of coming back with some numbers that we can work with. Our goal was to a zero deficit, balance our budget, and give us a healthy reserve fund.
Work toward that and
And,
continue
or at
to
least
work
work
toward that.
towards that. And I
Yes, ma'am.
think we're coming really close. Am I correct in summarizing that, Ms. Lopez?
We're getting very close to
Okay.
it. And thank you for that. Your staff back here has worked very hard,
Sure have.
as has every department.
Yes.
You know, their contributions to this are sometimes unnoticed, but they do a lot of the legwork to bring to finance for us to fine-tune this product. Every department head understands, and they've understood for some time where we are. As city employees, we know and we understand that these are not our dollars. These are taxpayer dollars, which is sometimes, and you may have heard critiques about me here lately, I know no different. This is not my money. This is everybody's money. And if it's money that is due to us, we are going to collect it. And if it is money that we need to expense, we are going to make sure that we get our quotes and we do our homework.
And I know that, I mean, I personally feel so grateful for the hard work of all our city employees, because the question out there was, what? You didn't increase taxes, now what? How are you going to address this deficit? And I think we are coming very close to proving that things can be done when we work collectively as a team, and that really speaks volumes for me as a council member. And thank you again. And I know we're not done yet, but
No, ma'am.
we're so close to whittling this down.
Thank you, Ms. Moran. Ms. Carrasco, you have something to add?
Yes, in adding to, I just want to make sure that, and correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction or I say something that I'm not supposed to, or if I'm not correct in what I'm going to state right now, but we're lucky that we did have, or we're grateful that we do have a healthy fund balance in the INS, so that we're able to do this at this time. But if we continue the trend of not balancing or not watching our expenses, and we're in a situation where, whether we like it or not, we may be faced with raising taxes. I mean, it's the reality of this, because we can't continue to manipulate and deplete stuff. So we need to be mindful of that too. We might be able to do it this year, but we need to be very careful and work smart about what we do for our future of Alice.
And I agree with Ms. Carrasco that, we will continue, and again, I cannot stress that we as city employees and as council need to be more responsible with our budgets and watch them carefully. But again, that's why my questioning about the utility system and looking at that as paying a portion into the INS, because that will help us increase and create that healthy reserve in the INS. Am I correct, Mr. Ramos, in saying that? Okay.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with all of that, and thank you for all of that, we're not gonna go through it again. Y'all are amazing.
I know.
So, since that was just a review and discussion,
Public.
we're gonna go on to agenda item number 8. Review and discussion of proposed changes to the plan provisions of the retirement benefits to the City of Alice employees provided through Texas Municipal Retirement System, including but not limited to employer matching ratio, updated service credit, annuity increases, and contribution rates, and take any action necessary as a result of the discussions.
This is a revisit.
To
Now
revisit.
that, I'm sorry.
Because we were gonna revisit
Yes,
after we
sir.
went to.
Yes, it is an action item, and one of the reasons is that we, in order to continue, and we're getting very close to our deadline
Right.
of adopting a budget, we would need to know from council how they wish to proceed with this. And, as we walked through before, we have some scenarios painted out. If there's other things you would like to see. I think when Mr. Mills spoke, he emphasized and very much spoke to my heart as HR, because we do invest a lot in our employees, and our employees invest a lot in us. And I think that the 5 scenarios, well, the 4, I don't really like number 3, but the 5 scenarios that have been presented to you, I think, are viable. I think that it would not prohibit councils in the future from looking at other options. In 3 of those, do not touch the match, but you are seeing some reductions. And I think that it would be something to really consider.
Okay, and council, with all due respect, I think we've beat this till we're blue in the face. I know I'm blue in the face. So I think it's time to do an action on agenda item number 8. I know we've gone through it's not an easy one. But at this time, I'm gonna entertain a motion for agenda item number 8 so that they can complete the process. So that they complete the process.
Well, then I'm gonna voice my opinion, and y'all, I'm pretty sure it's not
Well,
gonna
we
be
can make a
like.
motion and
I
second
make
it.
a motion to leave it alone.
Okay, so do I have a second on that?
Just leave it alone. We're at 240, no, what are we at?
We still have a
200 and-
deficit of 226,991.
226,000 just for ours,
Just for your general
for the general
fund.
fund, and
Sir.
councils of past
Yes, sir. You're
have
absolutely right.
left deficits of
$4 million.
$5.5 million, and $1.3 million.
And I think
A
that's why we're in this
$200,000
situation.
deficit is something that the city can work with.
And I'm
And it
gonna have,
leaves benefit for next year. If we have to revisit it, we have options. That's how I feel about it.
Okay, so he has a motion on the floor. Do I get a second? There's no second. So the motion dies.
I'd like to touch on something that he said, Mayor, if I may.
Would you like to make a motion?
No, it didn't pass, it died?
It died.
Okay.
So we need to figure,
We have some discussion. I'm going to ask the city attorney whether or not, I mean, it's my understanding, the law requires that we balance our budget, and that we're not previous councils that have left large
That's
deficits
the
or
general
deficits.
fund. Our whole budget is actually going to be at a profit right now.
Yes, it's section 56 of our charter, and it requires a balanced budget in our general fund and debt service. And just in response, there's a lot of councils that had a balanced budget up till the last couple. And so, you know, I mean, I know we went through the process, I know that staff was able to be certain we complied with section 56. But it's section 56 or charter, and it states that estimated expenditures shall not exceed estimated resources. And that's in our general fund and our debt service fund. And so you're gonna have to balance out your general fund.
269,771.
We have to balance that out.
Okay, so I'll entertain a motion. I think we have 5 scenarios in front of us.
I know staff has worked really hard at this. Miss Diana in finance, do you all have a recommendation that would meet our goals at the end? Our
They
goals
recommended
being-
number 3.
No.
Four.
Not 3. I'm sorry, 3 is the one I would not
I'm
want to
sorry.
see.
Backtrack.
No.
Number
Let's
4.
let's take 3 off the table. We're not going to go 1 to 1.
If I had to put them in order for you, 4, 5, and then 2.
I'm sorry, what was that?
4,
4,
5.
5, 1, and then 2.
Now, which one would meet all our objectives, our goals that we started out with? Balancing our budget, leaving us a healthy reserve.
4.
4? And that would
And you
leave
would
our
have-
match.
You would
2.
leave your match 2 to 1. You would lower your updated service credit from 100 to 50, the annuity from 70 to 30. You would be a little slightly overfunded in your funded ratio of 101%. But the reduction to your general fund is 226,992. Right now, the deficit in the general fund is 226,991, and that was not coincidental. That is actual math.
Can you repeat that again?
Yeah, I'm having
Sorry.
trouble hearing you.
That, the number, I lost you at.
Yeah.
Option 4 would give you a reduction to your general fund of 226,992.
Okay.
The deficit in your general fund right now is 226,991. So it actually gives you $1 more in your general fund. And I was just pointing out that that is just coincidental.
Okay.
Yeah, what about option number 2? What would that give us a reduction?
Option number 2 would lower your match from 2 to 1 to 1.5 to 1. Lower your updated service credit to 50, your annuity increase to 50. Your general fund would see a reduction of 254,567. And again, your deficit hasn't changed. It's 226,991. So it would bring your general fund 27,576 positive. I would like to point out that with that option, there is very little change. I mean, you're looking at $27,575 that is there, and you are touching your match.
So, and I think, can we ask Mr. Mills a question, Ms. Mayor? Or so?
Yes?
Yes.
Mr. Mills?
If we're revisiting it, it was his presentation.
It's his
so yeah.
presentation, yes, sir.
Okay.
Council wants to do it, mayor wants to do it.
That's fine.
Yeah.
I just had one question to kind of touch on what his, Mr. Chris' concern is.
Yes.
I think you mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, that rather than doing a cutting or affecting the match, the updated service credit and the annuity, future council, that would be the easiest, or I don't know exactly what the word was, but that could be, we could come back and change that or fix that.
The updated service credit and the annuity increase, yes. Reducing the match, you run into the issue that future councils, depending on how far out it is before they revisit this issue, it could get to be cost prohibitive to get the match back to where it is today, when a future council would have more options when it comes to the annuity increase and the COLA. I mean, the COLA and the updated service credit.
So knowing that we need to balance our budget, so we have to take one of these options, and knowing that the updated service credit and the annuity increase would be the less restrictive road in the future, I guess. It's best for us to look at these options rather than not do anything and keep it current, because that will not address our deficit. Correct, Mr.
For the budget, I can't speak to your budget
If
issues,
I-
but
Correct, Ms. Diane?
If I understand your question correctly, you're asking if you keep the plan current, does it change the deficit in your general fund? Is that correct? No, it does not. But,
and I would reiterate that the order in which Ms. Lopez has laid out the options for you, option 4 being the first option, option 5 being the second, those two keep you in line with what you're trying to accomplish with your savings and leaving future councils more options to put you back to where you are today, should revenue permit that in the future.
No.
And what would be the impact to our current employees? I mean, if we were to go, for example, option 4.
If you went with option 4,
You know, like how much would it impact?
as we said before, you keep your match at 2-to-1. All the projected base retirement benefits that have been projected, they stay the same. Unless you've got an employee who has recently, within the last 3 to 4 years, gotten a major salary increase. Those would be your employees who would be most adversely affected by reducing the updated service credit. And then the other issue is the cost of living adjustment. The cost of living adjustment for those people who are retired, it would take a few years before inflation would trigger a new cost of living adjustment for them. And going forward, unless a future council increases that percentage, they would get less than they've been receiving in the change in inflation each year.
Okay. Thank you. All right, council. I'll entertain a motion.
For number 8.
Agenda item number 8.
I move that we accept agenda number 8 as presented. Which one? You have to choose a plan.
You have to identify if you're,
The whole-
whether you're going to do anything or not do anything. You have to identify.
Which one on here?
Option 4 or 5?
Okay.
Or like in the
So
order?
we're going to take which one for? John, are we taking for it?
I believe.
The comic relief.
You need to break it up a little here, guys.
There's no way to find 28,000? You don't think so? Because that 25% would make a huge difference in the current employees that are actually working.
yes, sir, it would. And, I mean, it's
I know y'all worked
it's a
y'all's tail off to
no,
get
no,
there
no. I mean,
already.
I think
going
it's just
from
time, Mr.
700 and some
President,
thousand to
by the board.
$28,000, there may be
Right.
some things that are doable.
Okay, we'll entertain,
My big.
Hold on, but see, I'm sorry, remember, we haven't touched fees yet, so there will be additional fees being added there. And that will help offset some of that deficit.
With your permission, may I add
Yes, sir.
something that really is nothing to do with legal, but we've been working very hard on collections, fees and monies that are owed to the city. We don't have a specific estimation on those funds that will be coming in, but I'm pretty certain that we're gonna have an influx of those monies, but I don't know if they've estimated those funds and put in the budget, number one. Number two, additionally, that this doesn't take into consideration potentially reorganization
Right.
and closing out positions that have been open and are budgeted for, or consolidation of duties. It doesn't take those are some possible other areas
Yes, that we
where
can look
funds
at.
might come, but
But we can't forget the fact that it's 269,771 that we still haven't closed. So therefore, any cupcake after that is
It's a
added.
risk.
It's a plus.
and-
So that we can get out of this hole that we've been dug from previous councils. Pardon that,
Addressing
but
Mr.
that's the truth.
The reason I
Addressing-
ask is
I
because
think
if we
we've
have
just
to go to an
muddled around
option.
and it's just
if we
enough.
Get the 28,000 from fees, get the 28,000
Sir.
from
Yes, sir.
position closures, we can give back our employees to a 75-30 as opposed to a 50-30. Because that does make a big difference on their projections and the being able to gather later on. And then it also gives us the ability, heaven forbid, we're in the same situation next year, we can drop it another 25%. So,
Let me ask, may I ask a question?
yeah, that's what I'm saying. We have to.
Yeah.
One concern that I do have, is overtime. I know there's a certain stuff that's been worked on, but I worry about that impact if we don't make an adjustment to help us anyway.
Okay, so I'll
Okay.
ask again, council, if we can stick to agenda item number 8 and let our staff, who has worked so hard to just find this part of, and it's not closure is what we're saying, it's just to try to meet that deadline, to have a balanced budget. They can plug these numbers in, and then from there, it's a work in progress, a daily work in progress, and these numbers can change. We're looking at this like it's a closed door. It's not a closed door. We can always come back, or councils can work with these numbers. You know, I don't feel like we should touch the match at all, and I feel 4 and 5 are very viable, workable prospects for us. And so I'm begging council to please make a motion on agenda item number 8.
Just, can I point something out very quickly? On 5, and Mr. Mills talked about this earlier, you're at 100%, you're not over that 100%. So you're not putting too much into it that you're going to have money sitting there. So just something to point out to you.
Correct.
That you're going to what? I'm sorry.
That we're gonna have money just
number
waiting
5.
for us on the other end.
On the other end.
Like money that we can't even use.
Right.
Because they just have it waiting for us, which is not good for the city, 'cause especially when we need money to work with. That's what we're trying to do. Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I make a motion that we, adopt?
Yes.
Plan provision number 5 that does not touch the matching ratio and does change the updated service credit to 75 and the annuity increase lowers it to 30%.
Okay, can I get a second?
I second that.
All right. All in favor of the motion as stated by Ms. Carrasco? Say aye. I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call at this time. Ms. Carrasco, how do you vote?
Aye.
Ms. Garza, aye. Mr. Crisp?
Nay.
Nay. Ms. Moran?
Aye.
Okay, the ayes have it. So the motion stands as stated, as Ms. Carrasco, adopting the proposed number 5 for retirement adjustment. Okay?
Okay, what we will do now is go back, plug this in, and we will schedule for Monday. We will do insurance, which is the last, a big portion of this. And,
We need number 10 to,
oh, I'm sorry. Well, I wanted to close this one up.
Okay.
And then we're ready to, unless anyone has any other questions.
Well, I have a question after the statement you were just about to finish.
Oh,
We're going
Do
to have
we
a
have-
meeting
Yes, ma'am. Monday, since we tabled the agenda item for the insurance,
Number 9.
I'm asking for a meeting Monday at 10:30, if that is okay with the council.
I think just, since we're having a meeting on Monday at 6:30, is that correct?
10:30.
Oh, at 10:30. I was going to ask if it was a regular meeting or a meeting at 6:30, is it possible to have another public hearing added
You
in there?
can't post for John, can you post for a public hearing at this point? I think we're outside
You
the
know-
statute. We didn't advertise for one,
Running the
but
paper.
they're always
We don't-
welcome
that's
to
why I'm
speak
asking, do
at
we have
public
the time
comments.
to post another public hearing?
No, ma'am.
And it wouldn't matter because we're having the meeting at 10:30, so I was just trying to get a public
time.
hearing
Yeah, but if
back
we
in
wanted,
the evening.
we could always put out on our Facebooks, hey, come in and talk during public comments.
Absolutely
And
will.
lay it on the council anyway. you
Yeah,
know,
well,
so.
but the thing is,
The time is fine,
public
but just like
hearings
you
are
did.
meant to be held when the public actually has time after
Well,
work to come in and give us their comments, input, and concerns.
Okay, so in reference to agenda item number 9, that we have put on the table for a special meeting Monday at 10:30 a.m. We'll now go to agenda item number 10. Consider and act upon approval of an ordinance of the City of Alice, Texas, adopting an organizational chart for more uniform enforcement, service, and distribution of work, establishment and/or abolishment of departments, divisions, and positions, providing a savings and separability clause, providing a repealer clause, revoking all ordinances in conflict therewith, and providing an effective date. Council, I'll entertain a motion.
I was going to,
I think
We were gonna wait.
we were gonna,
We're
yeah.
gonna wait.
I think since we were presented this, can
yes, sir.
we?
Yes, sir,
have some
that's
time
what
to
I
chew it
was
over
gonna.
and come back to it?
That's what I was gonna recommend. It's
Okay,
been
but
handed
don't
to
we
you
need a
all,
motion to
presented.
table?
You just take
For
no
no
action.
action.
Just take no action.
So then you just bring it back?
Yes, ma'am.
So can we're gonna,
Make a motion?
no action.
No action.
So this is where formally I say, is there a motion? I'll entertain a motion for agenda item number 10. Okay, no action taken.
Yeah.
Thank you. To make it official. Sorry, guys, we apologize. I'm kind of going, okay. So now, agenda item number 13, adjourned and/or consider and act upon adjournment. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
And no opposed? This meeting is now adjourned. The time is 5:39 PM. Thank you.